Hello, good evening, and welcome to another WEBSTER Report on this Sunday, on Star Wars Day Sunday, the 4th of May 2025. We're having a little bit of a chat off air, Alex, about anything that we might have wanted to talk about, but we might as well start with again what's going on in this country. We've had a few elections, or shall we say, voting that's gone in the way of reform. Nigel Farage is now banging his pots and pans, but I'm seeing there's cautions being brought up at the minute, saying that the way Farage is going, he could cause a civil war. You don't think they'd want us to have a civil war, do you, in this country, pal?
Well, we know about divide and conquer. It's an old trick. But the question is, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And what are we going to do? One of the things I realised, reflecting this last week, like sometimes you get to roadworks and you see like a lot of the time that there's no actual roadworks going on, that it's part of this 15-minute city agenda. And they just want to block the arterial routes to make it as awkward as possible to get in and out of towns.
Tell me about it.
Pretty clear for anyone with eyes to see. Well, the problem with it is I was realising earlier in the week, I've been looking at this trickster archetype. I've not spoken to you about this off air yet, but I was going to do it at some point. Might as well do it now on air. But I thought, when you come to the eschatological endpoints, let's just say we're getting closer from our perspective, that signs are imminent now with the things going on in the world. If this trickster, this serpent type figure is a shapeshifter and a game player, and we play by the rules of the game, he keeps it quiet. He keeps us quiet when we're playing by the rules of the game. Once people start rattling his cage, he shows more of a beast face. So you think, well, he's being covert, he's manipulating you without you realising. Now, if you look at it, we can feel powerless a lot of the time because of the things that are being done to us. We have very little political influence. It's bringing it back to Farage. And then we have the promise of some new person coming in who will actually represent the people. But the bottom line is, you're on a wing and a prayer. So from our perspective, always better not to farm it out to politicians, no matter what you think about their potential or which side they might be on. And I was thinking about this issue in terms of the pressure that they manufacture. They put chemtrails in the sky for 30 years, and then when Ed Miliband suddenly says it's okay, we'll talk about this as if we're going to start doing it, when they've been doing it for 30 years, suddenly it's like, oh, it's okay, we'll just admit it now. Nobody notices that it was going on all that time until the BBC or the government reflects the view that we think we should start doing this.
Well, isn't it interesting that it's going to cost 66 million to do this sun dimming thing, right? And if they're only starting it now, whose money have they been spending for 30 odd years, Alex? Because they've had this technology beyond 70 years. They used to use this technology in Vietnam to try and flood the Vietnamese out. On that, I can't even remember what the trail is, but they flooded it. They couldn't get anything. The Vietnamese just went underground. They dug tunnels to get away from all this stuff. So, whose money have they been spending?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, but the thing is, obviously, there's a kaleidoscope of issues all connected. But a point I wanted to make by it was like when you look at some simple issue like driving every day, and you can see there's an agenda where they're setting up roadworks where there's nothing really going on, and it's just to stop traffic. And when you know the truth, that's what's happening. But you can't stop them because they've got a grip. It's at that point that I think the trickster is basically prodding us, right, and especially believers, to have a reaction on the inside, to feel powerless, to not maintain our composure. And I think that's where we get our backsides whooped. Because I think if you look all around you, there's plenty of cause for frustration. And why is it so in our face? It's like the elites are throwing it in our face now. Well, wouldn't you do that to bait somebody? So does it strike you as like some kind of satanic agenda where Christians could start getting angry and riled up and lose their inner peace and therefore just be defeated by the trickster? Because he's using all kinds of methods that we don't even necessarily recognize, under our conscious radar. We know we're getting irritated, but we don't think it's a trickster strategy. But thinking about it realistically in the political domain, is a lot of this stuff that's so in your face now not being done deliberately because there is an energetic resonance behind it, a malevolence that is prodding us and poking us to have these reactions so we feel powerless.
Yeah, I think they're definitely prodding towards it. If they can get a civil war going, they can create a lot out of that chaos, because people will, when it gets bad, when there's when all the toilet rolls have been taken out of the shops again and all that stuff, they can come in with plans, they can come in with rules, they can come in with, like what we were talking about with Taylor, with executive orders. They can do all this. They can basically give us martial law, which, I mean, if you go into the court system now, it's not being run too differently to what martial law would be, apart from, we're not having hangings or beheadings or whatever as yet. But when you are saying, and again, we talk about we talk about, why is it the Christians that are singled out over this? I mean, you can't say anything against other religions because you've got to be you have to have diversity and be inclusive. But when you are seeing Labour councils trying to pass legislation to stop Christians preaching the gospel on the streets, no matter whether you're religious or not, that's a free speech issue. I often bring up Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller would be on the street preaching for everybody. He was there for abortionists. He would have been there for the Muslims if that was happening to them, because it's about having the free speech. So if they can quell that onto the Christians, that is going to create a Christians and Muslim divide. Now we have some really good Muslim friends who don't believe in all this. They don't believe in the what we would look at the fundamentalist, Islamic views, stuff that their families moved from those countries because of the traditions that they had. But those traditions are written in hadiths and in the Quran. Even the apologetics and the scholars will say there's things that are in the Quran, and if you just read it basically, you can marry 5-6-year-old children and consummate. But I know Muslims that say, no, that's not what we do. That we don't do that. So it's the fundamentalists. So you're getting this melting pot. You've also got this guy who's apparently he was in Sweden. He went to Germany. Now he's in Crewe, and he's calling him. I can't remember his name that he goes by, but he's claiming to be the Mahdi. Now he says he's not the Antichrist and he's not the Messiah, but he said that Jesus Christ. Now he's saying he follows Islam and Muhammad, but he said that when Jesus was here on earth, he was here as God. He came into creation as God. What Quran's he reading, Alex? I don't know where all this is going. We're getting with the Pope saying there's all these other ways to God as well. So he's obviously not following the Bible. What is it opening up? Because we can see all what's going on with all the bills going up, all the, council tax, mortgages, all these foreclosures. We can see all that is being set up for a bang. But why is, if the spiritual stuff doesn't matter, Alex, why is this one? I hate to use the term religion because Christianity has all these religions, but the Bible seems to contradict all these religions. So why is it just this that's singled out? Why is it only Jesus, Alex? If none of it matters, if you can just have any God, it seems like when you see smoke and things like that, you're going to expect some kind of a fire. So you can only see an agenda that is unfolding, and you can only see that the Conservatives played their part, Labour's playing their part. Are we now due? And I'm not being internetic, but are we now due our new Messiah? Is Farage going to be our Trump, who's going to come in and do all this? Bearing in mind the legislation that he passes against anybody who he claims to be an illegal immigrant, that legislation could be written so vague it could apply to really anybody. So What's your thoughts on that, mate?
Well, I think overall, one of the things is that any God, right, has to be mediated but through phenomena that people can perceive in their conscious field. Otherwise, it's like being in Plato's cave again. You've got some concepts floating around in your head, and they could be anything. So if there's not mediation from this purported deity, then it can't be meaningful. But if when it is mediated, usually it's mediated to us through language and description, revelation, alleged truth. So you've got claims, and that doesn't make such a God a construct. But as soon as such a God idea is communicated through language, the structure of language, it becomes through the structure of language a construct. That doesn't mean it's totally manufactured by human beings, but as soon as it's something, a perception, a set of ideas that enters into the mind of a human and is verbalized, that God becomes a construct. Even Yahweh, and even Jesus in a way, unless he actually turns up as God. So the whole point is, if God doesn't manifest into his material creation, then he's always an abstract concept where people have a set of beliefs about that God, which will always become ideological, and it will always become about having the correct beliefs about that God. Then it will always come down to contesting with those people that don't have the right beliefs about God, which is all the people who aren't you and what you happen to believe. And a lot of the time, it's not just people in the same church or mosque or temple or whatever it is. You might vary radically from them. And then, well, then if they vary from me, it's my version of God that's the real one. So if it's just a set of concepts that exist in our minds and that we talk about, that we verbalize, then it's a God construct or a God concept. And it's not clear what the relationship is between all these different concepts and an actual God. But if this actual God remains up in the clouds, then he's got to be primarily mediated to us through theories. If he's embodied as Emmanuel, God with us, right, then that is a significant interjection of God into human experience. Without that happening, God will always be a set of concepts which will be a product of language that people will debate and dispute. And really, then it starts to serve a psychological purpose as well, because people then start to use that belief in God as a crutch for their own weaknesses, damage, pain, things they don't want to look at. They can project it onto God, project it onto somebody else, create a story that absolves them of any responsibility and say it's the world out there. That's the problem with politics. When we look too much at politics as what's going on out there and what it represents, we moved away from that inner domain where the real source of operations should take place. And this is, again, it's trickster logic getting us to look too much at the external world. In a sense, it doesn't really matter what's going on in the outside world. It'll happen whatever's going on. We can only adjust our path to a degree in relationship to that world. But I think the point is, overall, Jesus was God incarnate, which is what More Credit basically said. And that's the definitive difference.
Well, that is the difference. In that Bible, that is the difference between everything else, that because of all these other concepts that you're talking about, where it becomes that construct. If you just read the Bible as a novel or a book or something like that, I don't think, because I've read it before, I've read books, I've understood the concepts behind them books, but understanding a concept doesn't actually let you understand what that Bible is. And I have as you said earlier, I've got a different understanding on a lot of things because I ask these questions like, how long did we talk about with using the AI protocols?
Yeah.
Using that to compile everything about Lucifer and Satan being completely different entities. We go on again about if you see a lad walking down the street and that's Dave's lad, that's Dave's son, and I say it's Tommy's lad, but it's Dave's lad, and I said, do you know Dave? No, but I'm sure it's Tommy's son. all of a sudden everybody thinks it's Tommy's lad because he's telling everybody it's Tommy's lad, but he doesn't know. So if tradition teaches us all, if the elders get it wrong, everybody's got it wrong. So if Satan isn't Lucifer, which it says he's the son of Shakar, which was an ancient Canaanite god, so that must be a fallen angel, and this is his son, we now know this is an earthly man, Nephilim hybrid, who wanted to rise. He says in Isaiah 14, I will ascend. And he was smoked down to the pit where people gaze upon him and say, is this the man that shook the nations? I don't think, reading that text as it is, Alex, you can't mix that up. You have to have an understanding that you want to twist that round. And Chubby Checker can't twist that well. That is plain speaking. So if that's wrong, what else have people got wrong from the Bible? And if we can't have this conversation, then there's a problem. Because every time we can't have a conversation about something, there is something being hidden. We can look at World War II, we can look at World War I, we can look at the Titanic. There's conversation about the Titanic. Was it the Titanic or the Olympic? They both look virtually exactly the same, and everything else was interchangeable. One had a bent keel and one didn't. So which one was it? We've got the Federal Reserve Act. The people who were against the Federal Reserve Act was on that. So we've got all this conspiracy. We've got an insurance job. We've got everything that's going on there. But to shut that conversation down is silly. There's no rhyme or reason for anybody to not be able to raise any question. My mum always said there's no such thing as a stupid question if you don't know the answer. But when you ask that stupid question and people just go, because it is, it's not good enough anymore, pal. And we're beyond the pale with all this. Voting for reform, what will this change in this country? Will it give us something? Will it give us something to rally round? Or will it create this civil war type attitude where we've got people in this country that people are going to say, you shouldn't be here. We've seen it in Ireland. They did a march and a protest saying that they wanted the immigrants taken out of this town that it's in. And you can see that people they've just had enough. You know, we've seen people come and we've given everything, Alex. The NHS, everybody comes here for free things. But now we can't get it and we're paying for it and we can't get access to this stuff. Myself, I couldn't get access to mental health services, what I needed, because I didn't want to kill myself yet. Once I'm stood on a motorway bridge, then I can have access to it. So we've got everything upside down. So voting again, expecting something different, what would that achieve, Al?
Well, we might take a slightly different view. I don't have any strict view one way or another about voting in the system, because it's not about whether something works or not. Sometimes through discipline, we have to make things happen or commit to paths that, given the right framing, would lead to good results. See, if you abandon all social institutions, it's like saying, Sunday school, ultimately provides a kind of a moral backbone and fibre to children, whether they become Christian or not. If you get rid of all those vehicles and go, oh, these are just dead institutions, and they don't exist sociologically anymore, then you can't fill them with something more meaningful than what already exists there. Like we said many a time, the system itself is not bad. It's the fact that it's been corrupted. So if we rail too much against the system, we could create the impression that we don't believe in systems or structures, but we do. We just don't like the way they've been colonized. So for me, if somebody chooses to vote and they believe in it, I'd encourage them to vote, regardless of whether it makes any difference, because it doesn't really matter whether it makes a difference. It matters that that person is aligned in their inner world with what they're passionate about. And if they've got no other vehicle that can make a difference, it doesn't matter that one might not really make a difference. It's better that than destroying all their hope. somebody else is really convinced, yeah, I just a waste of time. I can't bear to vote. Then they shouldn't vote, and people shouldn't try and force them to vote on the grounds that, oh yeah, but if you don't vote, like my argument I've issued, but yeah, but if you don't vote, then we're abdicating the system. So I'm saying you just got to let be what will be. Sometimes it'd be better if one day 8% of the populace turned out. I know there was like about not even a 30. I don't know if it was a 30% turnout for this recent local election, but they weren't sending polling cards out. They were trying everything in the system, but they will do that. So ultimately, I can't see the point in worrying too much about what they do or don't do. At the end of the day, personally, me now, I'm not invested in anything the system does. And when I was looking at stuff, even the little annoying things like temporary traffic lights that are being deliberately put there that used to wind me up, now I just breathe deeply and go, yeah, it's just a god. It's just in my face, and I'm not going to rise to it. I'm going here, I'm doing this, I'm about my business. This is what I'm doing, and I'll just be delayed by a few seconds because of this policy that they're implementing. And don't allow it to kind of take a grip of me and start to control the way I think about the state of the world. Because, from our perspective as Christians, it doesn't really matter. At some point, we're going to reach the tipping point. The Sodom and Gomorrah moment's going to come. For this guy who claims to be the Mahdi, he's false, but what's he doing? He's tapping into a message that resonates with people. That's why he has followers. Why? Because the world does need a form of purging and judgment. So he's coming as a crusader against evil, even though he's got some really bizarre ideas. Why do people listen? Because they know that a time is approaching when this kind of thing is going to have to be rooted out, but not with swords, not with religious violence, not with jihad, no way. But the message of Jesus was much, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. That doesn't sound like a battle cry to me.
It depends. It depends what you mean by a battle cry, because the division's already here. The battle lines are already set. It depends on whether you mean going fighting these is a battle, or resisting and exposing is the battle. And whether we get attacked or get taken away or stuff like that, we've just got to stand our ground and do our bit.
Well, interestingly, right, I ended up having a discussion yesterday unexpectedly when I'd been down to Ilfracombe. I went AWOL. I came back for over a week, and I didn't let on. I parked my car on the next street. I didn't let on I was back, which you obviously know. I'm just saying this to the viewers. And my neighbour wanted to talk to me. I'd only been away about 5 days. He sent a message, and then nearly a week later, his missus sent me a message, and I just ignored him. Because I didn't want anything from around here tainting what I was doing when I was down there preparing. So when I come back, I thought, what's all this about? I got back, my house was fine, secure, no problem with the house. Spoke to him finally yesterday, and then they invited me round that evening into the house, and it was about a neighbour dispute. And it was really interesting to see because there was a few things going on. They're a couple, they had slightly different points of view, but they were irritated by these neighbours 2 houses down. There's an access issue. And it's been a bone of contention for a long time, simmering. So I ended up getting dragged into it, but not in a bad way. But I could see these 2 neighbours of mine who were brilliant, great couple. They were just exasperated because of how it's gone on for so long. And I looked at it. And I could see that because the people they're talking about, right, they're the curtain twitchers. They've got no life. They're always looking out on the street, looking for something to be wrong so they can make themselves feel better. And they're sick of it because they're affected by it because of this access issue. So, you look at it, you think that's a messy situation. But when they were talking to me, it sounded like they had one set of concerns, but the reality was they were just carrying all this frustration, right? And there was almost like someone held back, almost up by the throat, enraged by what had happened. Now you can see that energy was still there, right? And as soon as I looked at it, I thought this is a complete pointless waste of time, but I could see how they were harming themselves by becoming bogged down in what these next door but one neighbours had been doing or weren't doing, or the messages that they were sending them, or how unreasonable they were being. I just said, well, they're just people, and once you work out that the curtain switches you've got no life, you just have to manage the situation, not get embroiled. But it struck me because I'm not talking to her. They know I'm Christian, I have faith. I'm not in the face with it. But, ultimately I could see the fact that they couldn't let it go. Even though they were in the right and they're good people, there was no forgiveness in them. Love your neighbour. Well, the 2 doors down. And, he was ready for throttling him. So, and I looked at it, I thought, well, who's this really causing pain to? Because it was all getting exaggerated and wound up in their own minds. And you can see that this war is going on in the heads of all these different people, neighbours. And then you start looking at when Jesus loved thy neighbour, and, the Israelite tradition, love your neighbour, they hate your enemy. And Jesus says, no, love your enemy. And you think, wow, you couldn't be more relevant, could you? And I got dragged into a dispute like that. And I could see just how actually practical, how simple that advice can be to be applied. It's like, well, yeah, if these 2 who are in the right had more compassion, I'm not saying they should put up with stuff, but had more compassion, didn't allow themselves to become so irritated by everything that's gone on, they won't be harming themselves. And there's more risk of it escalating because of the reaction that they have. You can't do anything about people who are, like, say, dumb or don't think about very much, or have got, like, entrenched pain that they're acting out all the time. They just happen to be acting out in your space, and if they live near you, you're getting all that. It's like when you have 2 gardens next to each other. If they don't maintain them and they've got weeds, your garden's going to get weeds, because that's just how it is. So you can't avoid the weeds that other people bring into your life, whether it's individual neighbours or governments. So I think we've got to have a strategy where we're grounded in the message, not just as a theory. The gospel isn't just a theory, but you can turn Jesus into just another ideology as well. So I think, but I really saw it yesterday in a practical example of people winding themselves up when they didn't need to.
Well, it took me a while to get over me keep losing my parking space outside my house and having to park halfway down the street.
Yeah.
It used to wind me up incessantly. And even now I still go, don't react. It can get silly. But I also understand the frustration. And plus, I know a lot of people that just go along to get along. That's what the English bloody reserve is, isn't it? Just go along to get along. Let's not complain. Let's queue up. Let's ask questions politely and all that kind of stuff. And if you mix that pot up enough, people who get to that point, they can't do anything because they're being controlled from something that's external. It was the same with me when I started in the court system, how the courts took control of everything, using armed police and all this against me. All these, you have dogs who come as debt collectors. Everybody's getting these dogs after them now. And it's all through lies and the injustice. And how do you get to that point, Alex, where you can forgive these people? Because I had to forgive. I mean, I know a fella who was on my wing. He was in his 70s, John, and the council went after him for everything. They were taking it. He had, a number of properties, and because he'd taken up some of these railway sidings, because if there's spare land and you take it and you put a notice in the paper and nobody bothers, it's yours. Nobody bothers with it. So this was his argument. And he said, look, if you can show me, I'm fine. But they never did. And all his paperwork was correct. And it was like old school. So he had hard copies of everything, his files everywhere in his cell. And I'd seen some of his paperwork and I went, you were never going to win this. And he got so frustrated, he set fire to a bin and ended up in jail for arson. So this is what it does to people. And this fella's worked all his life, paid all his bills, paid his council tax, and then all of a sudden the council do all this and losing his properties and take it and put him in jail in his 70s. So this is what the system is doing, and the system should be able to be used the exact opposite. you just mentioned it before about the corruption that's got in there.
Mm.
The problem that we've got is we've got nice people who are acting corruptly, but they don't even understand that they're acting corruptly because they're within a system where they've got to make applications, they've got to speak to hierarchy, and if they get an understanding of that and then try and challenge it, oh, you can't practice law anymore, we'll take that license off you. So you go in on your own, you try and represent yourself. Oh, he's a free man of the land, knobhead him, don't listen to him. And the police go, yeah, he's a knobhead and all this. So they poison all these waters all around. And it's trying to get that clear channel of water. And there's a lot happening. There's challenges being made against these people. We could see big changes like what Taylor is talking about in America. But we've got to look at what comes after that. Peace and safety, Alex. Peace and safety.
Well,
yeah! Oh!
We've got to correct erroneous doctrines. So, for example, when More Credit said here, our neighbours are everyone we come into contact with, not just them next door. Not true. In a general sense, you could say it applies, but no, neighbours are neighbours. And there's a difference. If you walk down the street and you walk into the local park and you cross someone's path and you call them a neighbour, you pass them, something happens, you move on, you probably never see them again. There's no consistency. There's no constant tensions that might build under the surface. It doesn't really test you. So it's like when Jordan Peterson said, clean your room. All these people with these ideologies about how you should change the world, all these liberals, but yet they don't actually. A lot of them are just young liberals living at home with their parents, not established in the world. And they haven't put their own sort of situation in the right frame. And yet they're commenting on everything that's going on in the world as if they have the answers. So it's the same. If you can't love your neighbour as your actual neighbour, that's what it actually means. And then, of course, what Jesus is saying is, well, yeah, what happens when they become your enemy? Are you allowed to hate them then? No. It just becomes more challenging to love them. Anyone can love someone who treats them right, or they're part of their in-group, like Jesus said, the Gentiles. Don't even the Gentiles love those who love them. Yeah, love your neighbours. Oh, yeah, we're all backslapping. Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? Well, we're getting on really well until the first dispute. Until ego comes against ego, needs come against needs. Then how are you going to deal with it? And if they're unreasonable with you, are you going to be unreasonable back? Are you going to meet force with force? You're going to meet violence with violence? Are you going to get swords out? Because in the end, that's how it escalates. And that's what Jesus short-circuited. He said, it won't be like this. And of course, for that to be meaningful, it's got to be tested in situations that are meaningful. Not just some random neighbour. Someone you call a neighbour you passed in the street in the shopping centre had a slight difference of opinion with. You don't walk up to people in the street and go, can I just love you for a minute more, mate? Just not how it works. So
I think it depends on what area.
Someone's been on a dodgy app, right? So, we've got to be careful that we don't just come out with generic stuff that's got no basis in reality.
Well, just answering More Credit in the chat room, Alex isn't referring that it's just your next door neighbour. It's more challenging when it's your next door neighbour and there's a dispute going on that you see each other every day. That's what I think you were getting at, weren't it?
Yeah. Love thy neighbour. What he said, not your next door neighbour. Yes, it doesn't matter what Jesus is etymologically saying. Jesus, as if Jesus was going to go, Luke, when I say love thy neighbour, I don't mean your next door neighbour. He obviously means the people around you. Because what is a neighbour? The people near you. And near you in what way? Yeah, not just physically. But physically is a good start. And I gave an example of a neighbour who had not sort of engaged with it at that level. I've lived here 7.5 years, which I suppose people didn't know. First time they've invited me, I went round to their house, but why did that happen? Because they were irritated about something. They were irritated, they were bothered. And it was my role to try and calm them down a little bit. But because what their idea was that this was a big dispute, because it was big for them. And then they would try to get me, not in a dodgy way, involved in the dispute, And it's like, I just declined, because it's like, well, storm in a teacup, really.
Did you manage to pour oil on the troubled waters?
Well, it was the same thing that's usually the case. After a while, it was funny because he said to me, the bloke, he said, hey, this is turning into a counselling session, isn't it? And it hadn't. I hadn't been doing anything. I just stayed calm. Because I stayed calm and they were getting aerated, they became more self-aware about their own levels of aeration.
Yeah, it's because they've got to start thinking.
Well, I didn't match their energy either. If I'd have matched them energetically like this, they wouldn't have noticed any contrast to where they were at themselves. But once you lower the tone, not in a bad way, but you lower the frequency and the energy, they start to feel, oh, why am I vibrating at this level? Is there something wrong? And they can see you're calm. And then they go, oh, yeah, I'm stressed. I'm offloading. All right. And then they start questioning themselves and going, oh, no, I don't need to tell you this. And then suddenly it's like, so I think it's a point about presence. You know, at the end of the day, they had opinions galore. Like you can have opinions about God or opinions about rhubarb. Everyone's got opinions, you know. We're very quick at having opinions. People share them all the time. That's what we do. But there's a big difference between having opinions, like opinions and theories about God, and that God showing up, or reality changing, and us shaping reality in a positive way, because it is energetic. If we just get roped in at the level of the presentation, if we get wound up by the fact that they keep putting these temporary traffic lights up to slow us down, we'll be in their grip. They'll be prodding us, we'll be reacting instead of turning the other cheek.
Yeah. You keep mentioning those traffic lights. Remember me going on about the bike lane that Wigan Council decided Lee needed to have on one of the main arteries into Lee and out of Lee?
Yeah.
They made it one way. Well, people got used to it. They weren't happy, but they got used to it. But then they announced, oh, it's two-way again. And then they put temporary traffic lights right in the middle of it. Why? Why cause all that hassle if it's not part of something? Because either that or we're paying absolute imbeciles to just make stuff up. And I'd like to think that the people doing this stuff aren't doing it on purpose, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of common sense. It seems to be we get a lot of roadworks that come just after Christmas. They just start digging holes everywhere because they need to get money spent. Otherwise, they're not going to get it in the next budget. And then when they get up to that budget and they've got it all replenished, they go, right, just skim over it, just fill it in, bit of aggregate, bit of tarmac on top. Well, it'll only last a month. Yeah, we'll deal with it then. You know, they've got all this stuff that's being turned against the people. The police locally, we've got trouble with gangs. And the police locally are not doing anything about it, either because they're being told not to, or there's some kind of, I don't know, tension about dealing with ethnic people. You know, if once upon a time, Alex, we had gang issues, the police would just go in and deal with gangs. Look at what happened with all the Manchester gangs, the Gooch gang and all them. We used to have and police went in and did all that. But now we've got a different type of policing. And we've got to ask the questions, is this purposely being done? Or have we just got a load of people who don't know what they're doing?
Yeah, it's a bit of both.
And
I think one of the things that I've been looking at is it's connected to what I've just been saying. People need to get better at discerning things. You know, like if there's a trickster hand, like a glove puppet, the question is, what's animating this? What energy is animating this movement? Yeah. And as soon as you know what it is, if you know it's unwholesome and it's trying to draw you in, you just resist. You resist being drawn in. But then, in order to resist, you've got to displace it with something. So what I'm understanding now more and more about Christian life is, and it's a funny thing saying that, isn't it, when you've been one for 37, nearly 38 years. Well, that's how it goes. Is that you need to discern the pattern underneath it all and not get drawn into the energetic pattern, because that's where you'll resist. And what you need to do is when you displace the pattern, you need to displace it with the Christ pattern, the pattern of Jesus in your life. You know, transformed by the renewing of your mind, Romans 12:2. If we just react to what's going on with a generally Christian message about Jesus and incarnation, it's not going to be enough, because others will just reduce it to ideology. Go, heard it, or I believe this in the marketplace of ideas. So unless they see Christians embodying the light, unless they see Christians turning that kingdom that we see out there upside down. We're just like everybody else. So, and if churches just fly flags, I mean, how many churches fly flags for Ukraine? I mean, straight away, you might as well have a sign of apostasy flying over the top of your church. It tells you that that church is obviously just sold out to political structures and has no intelligence whatsoever. So you see all these visible markers, and you just got to look at them, and you sometimes think, yeah, got to move on, got to find a better setting, got to find a place where I can find something more real, connect with people who are real, and then displace the false with the real by embodying it.
Well, if you look at your neighbours, right, they're stuck in that frequency, being tossed to and fro on their own emotions,
Yeah.
mostly themselves tossing them to and fro, with possibly a few little whispers coming in here and there, and they'll never focus. And what you did was by lowering your tone, as in verbally, and being calm, they couldn't stay on that frequency because there's no information, there's no communication.
Yeah.
So as long as you stay there, they've got to come
Yeah.
and speak to you at that level. And
Yeah.
once you start speaking that level, that's like when Peter walked on the water. As long as he kept his eyes on Christ, he was fine. As soon as he noticed the waves, and that's where we all are, because
Exactly.
we're brought into this world, Alex, and we haven't got that calming issue. You know, we just have a life that we get used to. You know, there's
Yeah.
trauma here, there's trauma there. I told you about the recent traumas in my family that's going on. You know, just yesterday, a family member just dropping dead. It's these things are happening all around us, and
Yeah.
we've got to try and discern it differently, because straight away you could be anybody can be thrown into that pit of despair, and it's so hard to climb out of that, Alex. If you've not got the support, or you know, if you rely on the NHS, you're struggling, because the NHS is at breaking point. They've never been. They were completely written no debt whatsoever. How that happens in a debt-based economy, I don't know. But they had no all 113.4 billion debt wiped. Somebody that was owed to somebody, presumably. But now it's not in debt, allegedly, yet there's no money for it. There's nothing happening. So they're looking to go to medical insurance and stuff like that. I've heard family members say, well, I think it might be worth looking into going private because of all this stuff. Well, that's how it starts. And that's how you know, this is how they get this through. When it goes back to voting, Paul, it's like voting for this, because they'll say they'll do all this, but then you've got parliamentary privilege where they can lie to us and then do nothing. So for me yes, reform is a different kettle of fish compared to what we've always had. So you've got reform coming in saying different things. That is going to look appealing. Labour lost one of the safety seats basically over the past week there. But what is it going to be bringing? What is their manifest? What's their manifesto going to say? We're going to look at Farage and what he's saying, but what's the manifesto say? How does this stop the agenda that's been, you know, growing like cancer across Europe? You know, Trump has stood up and started to cut the cancer out that everybody could see, and he looks like he's the saviour. He's looked like he's bringing this golden age in that Taylor talks about. You know, the new Atlantis, all that kind of stuff, this golden age that they've had before. This is now, we see these balances of power. We don't know what's going to happen with the Pope, but I did find it quite funny that Trump tweeted a picture of him as the Pope. You know, it's like there's an inside joke that we're not all part of, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's a good comment here by Maximum Effort. Using our moral compass is don't be fooled by the noise, and that's it really.
Well, you know, that is one of the issues, though. People's moral compasses are being off kilter because we're being groomed into a society that accepts things that aren't moral. It's okay to do that. And it's got worse and worse and worse over the past 30, 40 years. Since 9/11 and 7/7, everything started to change socially. More legislation and the pubs not being open, and then it was cheaper for people to stay in. Then you get this COVID where people are just locked up for months, paid to stay at home, and they think it's great, it's a holiday. And then they try and go back to work, and they're either applying for their old job back, or there is no job for them, and then they can't get the money paid to them again. But you can come over in a rubber dinghy with no information and get everything. It's almost like you're goading people into stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's our responsibility not to be goaded, but I think it's a moral compass is a good way to put it for people who say we're not Christian, specifically, because it can be reduced to morals on one level, but it's much more than morals. It's about divine presence for the Christian. It's about being in tune. It's like having a radio. You remember the old dials we used to tune in?
Yeah.
And then you'd have the fine tuning, when it wasn't quite. To me, it's that we've got to be tuned in from a Christian perspective into Jesus Christ and his pattern and discernment. And then we've got to see where it's fake and then not just call it out, actually displace it in our own lives. Because if we don't do that, it's not going to be enough. Because again, it just reduces to a set of theories. I've spotted something wrong. I'm going to tell you it's wrong. But then what do we offer other than the advice? It's wrong. Well, all right then. But where's the example? It's always an example.
I also think that since the cross, when the law was written in our hearts, it wasn't written on stone anymore. So the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, was the laws written on stone for us to observe and try and copy. But on the new one, on the new covenant, it's all written in our hearts. So this is why we have these moral compasses. We still want to know the difference between good and evil, and that is our downfall, especially when we're starting to be taught or groomed that the evil is good. So the moral compass is there, but it depends on us then using our free will. If the moral compass is okay to do certain things, then that's the moral compass. It's when you get to the Christian values, if you stick to those Christian values, your moral compass doesn't go off, even as you said, if you're not a Christian. It's just off the values. That's why the Christian values in a state or in a country makes the country of value. But when you take God out, look at what happened in America when they took God out of schools and universities. Look at the state of it. That's basically what it is. It's not about banging the Christian drum. And I have to shudder to use that term Christian because there's that many people that claim it that clearly aren't following what Jesus said. It's not always easy to come out of this world and do that walk, because you have to give up some things that you like, that has never caused you any harm, and it's wonderful. But you've got to think of an eternal thing that's beyond here, and we're here, Alex. What was it you said earlier about it's, we think everything's okay because nothing's going really wrong in the world. The world's bad, but you're going to get up and go to work or go for a walk tomorrow or you're meeting somebody. That's happening. You're not locked up in a camp or anything yet, so you don't see this Venus flytrap that's closing. And that's the danger. It depends on whose Venus flytrap are we sat in.
Well, according to On a Plane, duckbill platypus was a mistake. So maybe
listen, those crazy fallen angels corrupted all kinds of flesh.
Yeah, I mean, I always used to think about duckbill platypuses myself. I used to think, wow, what were you thinking, God? When you made that. It's like, what an interesting creature. But I think sometimes those examples from nature are quite interesting. Because you kind of go, what is the point? What is the point of that creature?
Well, we have to. It makes me think about the domestic pigs that we have now. How compatible they are, virtually DNA-wise, to humans. it makes you wonder what corrupted that flesh. We've got to ask these questions because this, I forget who mentioned it in the chat room, but should we know about what happened with these fallen angels, or should we just ignore it because it doesn't matter? Well, I think it matters because the corruption way back then is still the corruption that was fixed up to the cross. Everything since the cross is just, shut up, hide that, don't let them see that. It's all about hiding everything. That's why when we get to the Reformation, when everybody's getting it in their own language, they can't hide that anymore. So they have to mix the information. And this is what they did through the Enlightenment. You know, look at all these educated, clever people. They know much better than you. You're uneducated. So they get this following. They get a grooming period going. Then you just get people going along saying this is life. You know, I was born 1972. Lived in a pub. Lived in a shop. Had BMXs coming out my ears. Had every toy that I ever wanted. Played football, and then my dad's killed, and that changes your life because you start making decisions, thinking, "Well, I'm an adult now. I wasn't an adult at 16, Alex. I made some decisions that, looking back, they were good decisions. If I hadn't been a stupid, ignorant boy, you know, at 25, I made the biggest whopper of a decision in my life." And then I paid for that by trying to make up for it and then losing everything in that period. And that could have been all for nothing, pal. I could have just lost all that for nothing. And I've seen it many times where people just do this, they've lost everything and there's nothing for them. And I don't want to be like that. But I could have been if I'd have not had anything that would have given me hope. Because when you realise that this system is just going to do what it wants to do, and up yours, and you can't fight that, then what else is there to do? I don't know where I could have found the peace that I've had in my heart without God through this period. And that the 3 years leading up to this COVID bollocks at work, where you had people again in positions of management authority who said, we're just going to do this. They can't do their own job. They're not nice people, but they think that they can just do it because they've got a band 7 grade or something like that. And they're the people that they're promoting in the prison service, in the police, in ambulance, in NHS. People with no life experience, people with no ability to do the job. They just get told what to do. Make sure they do that. Make sure they do that. Even if it doesn't work, make sure they do that. When it fails, let's find somebody to blame. That is a piss poor way of running anything. You know, I wouldn't run a shop like that, never mind an institution like the police or prison service or anything like that. And once you've got them corrupt idiots who'll just do as they're told, then anything goes. You know, you've got grooming gangs in multiple areas and cities in this country, and they're not bothering with them because it could become a bit of a hot potato. And you know, it's baffling, mate. It's absolutely baffling. But with the way Farage is going, he's whipping up. I'm not saying he's doing it intentionally. Maybe Tommy Robinson didn't do it intentionally, but he's focusing on this stuff. But you'll get Farage who doesn't agree with Tommy Robinson. So they're creating a melting pot of different lots of people that could actually all organise, but they won't be able to. And that's the biggest asset that our government has, that they know that we don't organise.
I think Farage does agree with Tommy Robinson. He just can't be seen to be agreeing with Tommy Robinson.
That's what I'm saying. But that's the division.
Yeah, but that's because of media. I mean, ultimately, there's nothing more corrupt than journalism and judiciary, 2 J words. They're the 2 corks in the top of the bottle. And if you've got some decent judges who are not fearful of the system clamping down on them, if you've got enough of them, they could turn something around. But journalism is another one. So for me, they're the 2 institutions. You know, like when we served the police that time.
I think if we took some of the cases that there's some very meaty cases at the minute. Even the cases I've been involved in, if we put them before those judges you're talking about, we'd have changed everything. But the judges are selected because they are corrupt and they will do their best to find that weak spot, that bit that you've missed, to shove it right up your hoop and say, and what? That's what the problem is. They'll be able to select judges. We can't even ask judges to recuse themselves because they refuse. The judge in my case refused to step down, despite a turning case law over. You know, you can't even judicially review it because the judge at Manchester High Court said that in my case didn't have any merit because I named the judge and not the county court building, not the county court. I should have named them as the defendant in my judicial review. When was the last time that you could cross-examine or have a conversation with a brick, mate?
Yeah, well, you can't, so it doesn't.
So they purposely commit fraud throughout the judiciary. There's no two ways about it. I'm not saying everybody is, but they are committing absolute fraud every day. Thursday's money day. Why? Because it's rubber stamping fines. Let's get that money in. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's put some speed cameras up on that section of roadworks that we're not doing anything on. It's all about this stupid revenue, putting these cameras up. And people are going around cutting these cameras down. But that's what they want because they're going to have to get somebody to stop all this. So it will create more tension, more division, and we've got an absolute melting pot.
Yeah.
Do you think it's time for us to see what's happening over the pond?
Taylor time.
You think Taylor's ready? Is it Taylor time, mate?
Taylor time.
Hey, what's up, everyone?
Yes.
How's everyone doing today?
Yeah, good, Taylor. You?
Doing all right. Man. It's been
What have you got for us, mate?
What?
What have you got for us?
Well, first let me just start off by saying, oh man, it's been a bit of a quiet week, relatively speaking. Not really any big things to talk about, but there are some interesting things nonetheless. And first, I'll start off with Mrs. AOC, who is running against Chuck Schumer to be head of to be minority leader in the Democrats, which is I always found that to be pretty fun. I do find it to be pretty funny because I've always said,
how's he not in jail, Chuck Schumer?
Oh well. To be fair, it's probably not him. He's one of those people I think has been replaced, just going by his history and all that. And if you look at pictures of him, he doesn't look the same as he used to. But anyway, that's beside the point. AOC, I've said from the beginning that AOC has been a white hat operative, basically being a military operative designed to make the left, the Democrats, look as stupid as physically possible. Get them and get as many people hating the Democrats as much as possible. And with her possibly replacing Chuck Schumer, in a quote unquote attempt at being the Democrat nominee for 2028, this is another what's it called? This is another nail in the coffin for the Democrat Party, which Q said was going to disappear by the time this is all over. Now, as far as AOC goes, everyone knows just how much of a loony she is and all that, talking about the cow farts and all that stuff. And as I said, with her replacing Chuck Schumer, first of all, replacing Chuck Schumer in and of itself will, puts another bad actor out of the world stage, which is a good thing, of course. Because as soon as you put them out of the world stage, it makes it easier to go move into the justice phase. Which
Taylor,
yes?
Can I just interrupt? It's been mentioned in the chat room. 1 week they might be able to see all of your face. We can only see your forehead and top of your glasses, mate.
Ah, shit. Hold on, let me fix that.
I know you struggle to sit up, pal, but
Yeah, sorry. Also, it depends on where my camera is tilted as well.
we'll tilt it better.
Yeah, there we go. Is that better?
We can see your face, mate.
Okay, good. So, as I was saying about the punishment phase, we also now have it going out with the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is going to be what happened with the Pope that just was revealed. I believe this is from yesterday, from the Daily Mail, and I'm sure you know what the Daily Mail is.
The Daily Fail, we do know what that is.
The Daily Fail, good name. Okay, so
It's a sycophantic shit rag of ours, yeah.
yeah, you see, you heard about this story from yesterday?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. So now because the thing is about the Pope, he's one of those characters. He's like the Queen, who it's very difficult, if not impossible, to just sit up there and perp walk them live on television for the world to see because they're just too beloved. It's as unfortunate as it is, people have been so brainwashed to look up to these figures as demigod like people, and so unfortunately, the best you can do for these kind of people for justice is to reveal their secrets after the fact, and this is one of them right here. How the People's Pope shielded sexual predators in the clergy, including one priest accused of violently raping nuns. So Pope Francis, allegedly, when he came into power in 2013, he vowed to take care of the issue of sexual deviancy in the church, when in actuality, as is reported here, the very opposite happened. And this is from the Associated Press. They even show a picture here of Fr. Giulio Grassi, Argentina's Jimmy Savile, another one of these big pedo fanatics. So now we have this information coming out about the Pope, and this is just the beginning, and this is right after, very interestingly enough, of course, after JD Vance's trip to see what the iced up Pope with the gold tie and everything, the gold and everything. So my guess is that the truth about this Argentinian communist fake Pope is going to be coming out. Unfortunately, it's after his death announcement. But as I said before, with certain people like that, you can't really perp walk them because people are just too brainwashed into loving them. It's as fortunate as it is. Yeah, hopefully it won't be the same with Charles, because Charles isn't he in the UK? Is Charles a universally disliked figure?
No, certainly not. He's not universally disliked. He's not as well liked as the Queen, but people just love royalty. They love the royal family. They love the idea of the pomp and stuff like that. They don't understand the true history of it because they don't care to choose it to go and learn the true history. They like traditional. They like just traditional clappy hand stuff, Taylor. It's like everything that's been watered down. People like with Churchill, they don't understand just quite what a character he was. They just think he was this prime minister that was ace during World War II. They don't even understand. They don't even know why he was put there. They don't bother looking into that kind of information. They don't see how it's linked. They don't see how the Vatican was involved in all that, along with the Freemasons and the Jesuits. They don't understand these connections because they don't care to know them. And that Pope there was, people are in mourning and crying and how much he was loved, and yet you're just saying what we already knew, that he was covering up all this nonsense stuff because he's the head of the Vatican. Why is he not stopping all this? Why are priests allowed to go to a certain place, abuse children, and then instead of anything happening to them, they just put them on holiday for a bit and take them to another place? That's been going on for decades, hundreds of years. So when it comes to the Vatican itself, where you've got priests raping nuns, it's like putting a fella who was a rapist who turned into a transgender woman, putting them into a woman's prison and wondering why women got raped. There's no common sense there. The moral compass is completely off kilter there.
Yeah, more or less. And unfortunately, that's just how it goes with these kind of people. Even Churchill, for example, but even people like Churchill, his reputation even these days is starting to be questioned about his so-called his legacy when it comes to World War II.
Yeah,
you had that interview with Tucker Carlson about a couple
we should.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you finished with this one slide now?
Pretty much, yeah. So now I want to move on to this one right here. And this, okay, I don't know if this is showing on the screen. I can't see. Oh, okay, I got to present it. Damn, the way that works. Okay, so this is a big one. Although this is from about a week ago, but this is still, of course, really relevant. I don't think I got the chance to talk about this one. The yet another blow to the already dead, but push more into the ground the climate change hoax. And this is the climate change hoax has always been a very big one, going back decades. And I'll go ahead and just read a bit from the article just to make it more clear. Congress has voted to roll back the methane fee, a penalty on excess methane emissions passed by the Biden administration. More good news on the deregulation front to report from the article. Congress voted to roll back the methane fee. The move comes amid efforts across the Trump administration to roll back environmental regulations and boost fossil fuel production, which in turn could lead to the release of more methane. Methane is considered a super pollutant, quote unquote, because it can trap around 80 times more heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide can in the short term, and it's responsible for about a third of the global temperature rise since the pre-industrial era, end quote. Be not alarmed, boys and girls, for methane, like the other dreaded greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide is natural, harmless, and constitutes only a negligible portion of the atmosphere. Here's a breakdown of the Earth's atmosphere by the percentages. Nitrogen, 78%. Oxygen, 21%. Argon, 0.9%. That adds up to 99.9%. The remaining fractional gases, the greenhouse gases, are actually trace gases because they are not really elemental parts of the atmosphere. They include carbon dioxide, water vapor, and methane, all of which are 90+% natural. Termites, for example, emit more CO2 than human activity. Animal farts also emit more methane than humans. And yet the commie warmists would have us believe that this tiny fraction of atmospheric molecules can heat up so much as to catastrophically raise the temperature of the remaining 99.999%. This is the same sort of quote-unquote science which makes the claim that millions were gassed to death in Nazi gas chambers, the size of a 3-car garage, right under the collective noses of Red Cross camp inspectors and without leaving any chemical trace. But I digress.
Allegedly.
Man-made methane molecules are to the total molecules of the atmosphere what a single man is to a packed NFL football stadium. And I'm sure you can see how many people are in that. Yeah, that should pretty much tell you all you need to know about that one. And this is just showing off a good book here, Climate Boogeyman, which I recommend anyone to read if they want a full breakdown on the climate change hoax, going back to its origins. But continuing, take notice of how the dishonest, discredited, demonic, and demented slimes, which, though under submission, still has to appear libtarded, attempts to frame this event with false assumptions, aka accidental / assumptive fallacies, explained in bold added parentheses. The quote, the rules represented an effort to rein in global warming. But the Earth is not warming. The regulation of methane, but methane is mostly natural and does not affect climate, was a major component of earlier efforts to combat climate change. But there is no man-made climate change to combat. You see, fake scientists, not to be confused with experimental scientists, never actually prove anything. They instead utilize ponderous math equations and computer models, aka cartoon animations, to add a pretty fragrance to their bullshit and then present it as factual evidence, while fake news declares that only uneducated people do not trust the science. Lies of assumption and omission twist reality so as to appear that opposing scientific viewpoints don't even exist, with the only debate being about how best to save the planet. The reality is that mammalian burps and farts collectively emit more harmless methane than human activity ever will. Methane overdosing of the climate is bullshit, pun intended. Basic Greek logic, philosophy, existential fallacies. The entire debate about whether or not unicorns are mammals is fallacious because unicorns don't even exist. Trust the science. And that's enough for that slide. So, one thing that's important to know, by the way.
You do know, you just said that unicorns don't exist. Kim Jong-il, he went into the jungle and found a unicorn's lair and came out the jungle riding a unicorn. You know
that? There are certain things that I want to ride, but I don't think a unicorn is one of them.
I'm not interested in what that means.
But anyway, so the climate change hoax, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. And while I'm not necessarily referring to anyone here, but just in general, is that the climate change hoax by itself, without even counting the World War III or the economics, or the world government or any of that stuff, this by itself had the ability to bring about the New World Order and a one world government. Because here's a little bit of background and history on the climate change hoax. This really started back, I'd say, back in 1970 with the first Earth Day, which was broadcast, which was big. It was hyped up and big, back on NBC and CBS, which were the two major television networks back then. Walter Cronkite of CFR fame, Mr. New World Order man himself, prop this up for everyone to be hyped up for. And then ever since then, it's been slowly dripped into the curriculum. First, we had the recycle fiasco that started. If you notice, if you look at the recycle logo, what is it? 666. If you look at the logo for the recycling bin, you can see the 3 6s. It's the same thing with the Google Chrome icon.
Mm.
But anyway, so then of course we lead into the late 70s. So people like Leonard Nimoy, talking about the coming ice age and blah 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 blah. And then we head into once the Earth things started getting really warm, then they dropped the ice age scare and went on to the global warming fiasco, and then eventually with Al Gore with his little climate change stuff, which he started, or not started, but he made big, as he was he was one of those big people back then. So that's a little bit.
Me and Alex grew up in the era where we were devastatingly worried about the ozone layer, weren't we, Alex?
Yeah, it's another one. The ozone layer.
Yeah, they said something about that, and aerosol cans.
The hole in the ozone layer.
Mm.
We're all gonna die. That whole thing. So yeah, so there's various subsections to this whole thing, going back, I'd say, at least to 1970. And of course, then we had the Paris Climate Accords, which started under Obama, which he put us in. Then Trump took us out. Biden allegedly put us back in, but but it had no teeth to it. And so ever since Trump came along, this climate change hoax has been completely destroyed, because its main purpose has always been to regulate industry and always make it much more difficult for people to be able to get anything done. Because every single time that you want to build something or you want to fix a road or whatever, there's always got to be some kind of environmental protection nonsense that goes into it. Like, how will this affect the environment? Will this help solve climate change? Just like with the DEI stuff, where schools always have to schools were being forced to consider how diverse were they before they were allowed to admit students, etc. It was another thing to put shackles on industry, which is part of the reason why America and the Western world as a whole has been having so much difficulty in the last few decades, just being able to build anything, be able to get anything done. Because there's no profit to anything, because all the profit gets sucked out by all of these agencies and these regulations. I think
it's the same everywhere, though, Taylor. I mean, we I can't remember how many years ago it is now, but we had a place in South Wales called Tata Steel. It was a steel foundry, and they were shutting it, and all the workers got together and took a cut in wages so that they could keep the foundry going. And 100 miles away, there was steel needed to repair a bridge. And they shipped the steel in from China. They shipped the steel in from China rather than the foundry that was 100 miles away. Now that foundry's going, I don't know if it's shut already. But this is what they do. They just make a bit more money, drag a bit more money out. We're paying less out, keep it going for a bit longer. This is what they do. And you just named that they've attacked every infrastructure within your country to a point where, like I said, I don't think Trump could have lost. I mean, I would be very, very sorry for your country as the general public if they believed that Joe Biden was good as a president. I just thought Trump had to just come in and start saying, right, well, we'll stop doing that, we'll stop doing that, we'll stop doing that, and all of a sudden people who would never have voted for him, after they'd been put through the pressures that they have been, would eventually go for that. We've got that same issue coming over here. Now, you normally sneeze, and we'll catch the cold a few years later. And that's what's happening, mate. We've had all the same infrastructure attacked, and now we've got Nigel Farage saying that he's going to fix it all.
Oh, man, I keep getting the two people mixed up, their names mixed up. Your prime minister and the one coming in, and the one probably coming in. I keep getting their names mixed up, unfortunately.
Starmer is the prime minister now.
Yeah, Keir Starmer. Okay, and then Nigel Farage is the other one. Okay. Thank you for reminding me. I get names mixed up a lot, unfortunately. But basically, as you said. Yeah, as you pointed out, the climate change hoax, it killed industry. And thankfully, now that it's completely dead, and thankfully the majority of the public now understands that this whole thing was just a load of nonsense. And unfortunately, because Europe has been attacked for far longer than the United States, it's been libtarded and Marxified far more so than the United States was. Unfortunately, things take longer to happen there than it does over here. But as you said, it's a process. We sneeze, you guys feel it a little bit later, just like with the P. Diddy stuff. And then all of a sudden you guys have started to get some more people done in for child sex abuse.
Yeah. Have you got anything else for us slide wise?
Not much, but I do have this one little thing that I do want to show, which I do believe is pretty funny, and it's and it shows just how in control the good guys really are. So we have New York City, we have Mr. Brandlander. he's one of these people who have been defending what's his face, that MS-13 member. I forget his name.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah. That whole thing. So the controlled Democrat press have been, just like with AOC, have been given the shovel to dig their own grave. And even though that everyone knows by now that that whole story about him just being an innocent Wyoming dude or whatever was a bunch of nonsense, and that he's actually an MS-13 member. His wife came out, I think it was yesterday, came out and said that she wanted to be away from him because she would because he would attack her physically. A neighbor of theirs stepped up and defended her. Her ex-husband before the MS-13 man said that he wanted custody of his children because he didn't trust this guy because he knew that he was a criminal. So then you have people like Brad Lander and the other Democrats who have been just, again, digging their own graves, intentionally so, by design, by doing the stupidest of things. Like, for example, this guy said that he would, well, this one in particular, he said, "Come and get me," to Tom Homan, who was in charge of ICE, getting rid of all the all the illegals, starting with the big name criminals. And just look at the Twitter feed underneath that post, and you can already see that people just it's funny just reading these comments. Oh my goodness. So this is part of the design, as I said, giving these people the shovel to dig their own graves. Now, obviously, if the black cats, if the deep state were still in charge, you see, as evil as those satanic bastards were, they still had some degree of intelligence. They were still very smart. They knew what they were. They knew how the public worked. They knew how the human psyche worked, and so they knew not to do stupid things that would turn the public against them. And this is one of those things where you can tell that no one is, as this poster says, no one is this stupid and unaware that a post like this would elicit such a swarm of negative reactions. And that's part of the, that's part of the operation. Just like the other guy who said that he would go to El Salvador and if the guy wasn't imported back here into the U.S. and that the State Department and the government should pose sanctions on El Salvador if their president doesn't ship back the guy who was deported there.
Well, he was actually asked that. The president of Argentina was asked that. El Salvador was asked that in front of Trump, wasn't it?
He was.
By CNN or something like that. And he said, "Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to forcibly send somebody who's been deported. What am I going to do? Kidnap him and smuggle him back into America? What's he going to do?" And like I said, who was it who was saying, actually? I can't remember who was stating it. It was with the press secretary. There was a bloke with her, and he was saying that I couldn't give you rent-free property in these neighbourhoods where these people live because you wouldn't live there because these are MS-13 gang members, and you don't want your kids trafficked and stuff like that. So it smacks me as absolutely ridiculous. The ones that were calling for thingy the police, defund the police and get rid of guns, they were all living with behind enclosed communities with private security who were armed. So, there's something not right about what's going on. You're right, Taylor.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, here's another one. Tesla Arna suspect released for gender transition. Let me go ahead and play this 32-second clip. If you can still see it, right?
No, it's gone black.
Oh, for fuck's sakes. I hate that so much. Okay, come on. What do I got to do to keep this thing from going black? Oh, wait, no. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, is it still sharing?
I've not added it to the stage because you've got nothing there, mate.
Do you see, I mean, it's black right
Just a
now.
black
But okay.
background. Hang on, no, I can't.
Yeah, it was a video. That's why. Okay, you see it?
I can't. No, I can't.
Okay, do you have it shared?
It's just a black screen, Taylor. There's nothing playing. Now it's playing.
2 Tesla Cybertrucks.
Okay.
State of
Might be a
Missouri
little
now
too
in federal
quiet.
custody, now out of federal custody. Lawyers for Owen McIntyre argued that spending time in jail would disrupt his ongoing sex change treatment. 19-year-old Owen McIntyre facing federal charges for throwing 2 Molotov cocktails into a Tesla dealership back in March. 2 charging stations were also damaged by that fire. Channel.
Okay, so the point of
So,
showing
in
that.
other words, let's go and try and murder people and then say, oh, it'll stop me sex change operation and you'll get off. Where's the justice here?
Exactly.
Is this coming to our courts, Alex? We've already had to go to Supreme Court to decide what a woman was.
Yeah.
But, you know, again, that's oh, go ahead.
Women, men, you know, we know, don't we, what they are. Just how long we're going to keep stringing that sort of thing out about gender. It's so few people actually are in any way gender dysphoric. Very, very small amounts of people, and it's made into a massive issue. It's like it's the definition of insanity. Trying to get people to focus constantly on things that have no relevance to actual life. I see people on Facebook on a regular basis having these big debates about gender, and they're trying to be all liberal, even if they're not like anti-trans. They're still trying to be very, very sitting on the fence and very liberal about it, and it's just boring. You know, there's so many more interesting things to talk about, so many more serious topics in the world. It's just all distraction.
Well, look at how you just mentioned how small a number those people are. Then you've got somebody like a movie star who's got 3 kids who are all different. They're all not what they were born. If he's born a male, they're now female, or vice versa, and that goes into like Munchausen syndrome, because the parents are like, this is a novelty. Well, look, my son's a trans girl now. This is Daisy. It's not Darren. You know, we're facilitating people's feelings, and then trying to say that that's real. That's beyond Vanity Fair. That's an absolute make believe. I mean, the world has got to be falling apart if we can now just say that we are something, and we are, and you've got to treat if you've got to treat them like they identify. So you could be having a chat with your mate one day, and then all of a sudden he gets down on all fours and stops talking because he identifies as a coffee table at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. What can you do with that? You just facilitate him, put a cup on his head, or what? What are we doing?
I prefer getting my vegetables from the supermarket.
What if he identifies as vegetables? What do we?
I mean, to be fair, it is possible to become to be classified as a vegetable. You know, the kind that their mind doesn't work. That they're basically just a
Democrats.
Yeah. That's not what I was referring to, but yeah, we'll go with that. But
me and Alex remember a time where your mate would ring up and say, "Yeah, I'm picking you up in 10 minutes. I'm coming in a transit," meaning a transit van, and it means something totally different these days.
Coming in a tranny. Oh man, no, I mean something very different these days.
Very different. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
The languages, they've tried to corrupt the language as much as they possibly can, to where you cannot say certain things. I mean, when you're asking university students, can a man become pregnant? Yes, if they're a trans man. So a trans man's a woman? No, it's a trans man. How? Everybody knows that if we bury a man and woman next to each other and we dig them up 500 years later, we're going to know which was which. We're not going to say, well, I wonder how they felt. We're not going to get Robert Kilroy Silk to look at them and go, how do you feel? We've got to get our foot back into reality. And I think that's what you touched on earlier, Alex, about whether you're Christian or not. There's got to be some moral compass and common sense that's banging a drum and saying some of this is a little bit out of kilter, And when you've got major religions supporting it, you mentioned, a church putting a Ukrainian flag up. They're putting all kinds of flags up that actually go against what the Bible says. So they don't even follow the Bible anymore. So we are now in a society where we can have not only traditional Christianity, but traditional churchianity, traditional Islam. We've got traditions on everything. People are just living the way they feel. And, as long as they don't hurt anybody, it's like you said before, Alex, that they think they're okay. They're okay with God. Well, when I started to see there was the evil in this world, there was nothing that you couldn't get. And I got put into that position where I've got to go back to what's after this world, because I didn't believe religion. I know religion's just a waste of my time. But I never actually read the word for myself to actually understand it. What did he really say? What is it really speaking of in this book? Not what the Reverend said in my school days. Mr. Drummond was good at teaching RE, but there's no point me listening to what his version of it was, because he came from a Church of England background where they have hierarchies and they're taught how to deliver this stuff. So if the elders have got it wrong, I'm going to be taught it wrong. So I didn't really experience much as through religion. I never had those epiphanies. It was only after my dad died and I went searching, and then I tried mediumship, and I was quite good. But I still couldn't get that fulfillment. I didn't get that knowledge. I didn't know what to do with that. Then I get to this point and I start reading the Bible and I see that it contradicts everything. That in some form or another, it contradicts every single religion I've ever looked at. And it stands on its own. And every single religion that it contradicts says that's wrong because it was meant to say this. You get all of a sudden, people are correcting what God said. And I thought, well, considering all this stuff's gone to rat shit out here, and it's all mainly man-made input, maybe I'll just have a start with this and start afresh. And it was just different. It just speaks differently about things. It's when you start studying it, you end up with questions that people just can't answer, and people have read it for 35 years. They're reading the same thing as me, Alex Taylor. They're reading the same book, but they're not seeing what's there.
Well, this comes down to a problem of realizing when certain stuff is written. Let's say, like the Bible, for example. You can't interpret the Bible as being made for you specifically. It was made for people that existed back in those days, back when it was first written, and that's how we have to interpret it, from that angle, instead of interpreting it from a modern day point of view. Just like how a book that was written, let's say, in the 1800s, it's written for that audience, not for people that were going to live under a different culture from several hundred years from then. So that's something that people forget as well, is to not interpret books or anything under a different viewpoint than what it was originally intended to be. And we were mentioned before about the whole identifying stuff. This has hurt the conservative wing in many countries as well, particularly here in the U.S., because it's just like, if you have a real conservative who tries to come out against it, they end up getting slapped down. And unfortunately, really, it comes down to a lot of these companies and even a lot of politicians don't actually want to support and endorse this stuff, but they have to, because the big financial dudes at the top won't they won't support you if you don't support it. It's the same thing with let's say just like with the climate change stuff, as I mentioned before. If you don't support certain things, you won't get funding from, say, the United Nations. If your university doesn't support a certain amount of DEI programs, etc. Thankfully, with the Chevron decision and several decisions in recent years, a lot of that is being pushed back, and now universities these days, in particular, a lot of the bigger ones, are now being forced to are now being allowed to admit students and give courses that don't have anything to do with DEI, but rather, what they're supposed to be about, which is teaching people about the real world and getting them prepared for society at large. And the history of that stuff really goes back to the Frankfurt School in Germany, when the communists took over during Weimar Germany, and after Hitler kicked them out, they came to Columbia University to take over the teachers union, and then that's when it spread out to the colleges. When the United Nations was formed, they formed UNESCO. The same people formed UNESCO, the United Nations Education Organization. You have people like Milton Eisenhower, the brother of Dwight Eisenhower, heavily promoting it and sharing it to all the big universities. And so then you had the hippie movement in the 60s, which was completely engineered by the same people who engineered the Vietnam War. The same people, the World War II veterans, when they came back and had kids, they were indoctrinated in this stuff. And then those same people, the kids of the World War II veterans, would end up being turned into revolutionaries because of the hippie movement. Then when they had kids, and the 60s, 70s kids, they grew up with the beginning of the DEI stuff, the feminism, the LGBT, the climate change, and all that. And then those same people, those 60s, 70s, and the early 80s kids, are now the ones in charge of the universities. And so the people of my age, the millennials of the 90s, 2000s kids, they, just in the last few years, they've grown up and have gone out into the workforce. And, the imprinting has gone on for a few generations now. And as you said, it's not that these people are doing it willingly, as in they're not like trying to be manipulative. It's unfortunately that they just don't know themselves, because they themselves have been indoctrinated. It was this one Russian communist defector, I forget his name, who said that all it takes is a single generation to ruin a country. To ruin it. Bezmov, yeah, who said that, all it takes is a single generation to ruin a culture. And he's right. That's what the 60s generation was all about. The hippie movement, with destroying the culture, just like they tried to do in Germany in the 1920s, in Russia in the 1990s, etc., etc. The ironic thing is that, as bad as communism was, and of course it was a terrible system, Stalin, Mao, etc., they murdered millions and millions of people. But the ironic thing about them is that those same dictators, those same mass murderers, they were not interested in destroying cultures and destroying the family unit and promoting LGBT and any of that stuff. They wanted the strong national culture, because then they can rule it and then use it to basically take over the rest of the world. But it's ironic, because whenever these so-called democracies come in, they always ruin cultures for in different nations, like after the Soviet Union fell.
Well, that's why Marxist was so important to the likes of Stalin, because cultural Marxism brings all the countries in line to actually install communism. It brings them all to heel under it. It's when Yuri Bezmenov, was it the 70s he got to America, Alex?
Yeah.
When he got there, I'm sure he was quoted saying 85% of the Communist Manifesto was virtually already in place through cultural Marxism. Have you ever seen the 10 Planks of Communism, Taylor?
I believe I have. Yeah, I have, but I can't remember them all off the
Destruction of
top of my
private
head.
property, all that kind of stuff. It's virtually all in place. It's ready to go.
They're all in the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. And
Yes, correct.
whether the book is authentic or not is irrelevant, because the information in it is what's important.
It's
And
pretty spot on. It's pretty spot on for a book that's not reliable.
pretty much, yeah. And it's interesting too, because the communist people is the thing is that when when a hard leftist turns, they usually turn very hard, and they go far right, and they go pro God and pro Christianity and all that stuff. There have been many cases of communist defectors who have done that. I think Bestinov was one of them. But so my point is that it's ironic that these evil dictatorships, and the thing about Stalin is that he wasn't supposed to run the Soviet Union. That was supposed to go to Trotsky, but Stalin intelligently outmaneuvered him, because Trotsky was one of those hardcore Marxist type people, the ones that are just like destroy the culture, promote the LGBT and all that, no unity. He was one of those guys, just like Lenin. Stalin was more of an ultra nationalist. He wanted Russia to be he wanted the Soviet Union to be the king of the world, basically, to be the head of the world government, and a strong unifying culture that he could use in order to take down other countries by forming a strong military of cohesion. If that makes sense. Because when you don't have a unity, you have a weak military as well, because people don't know what they're fighting for, do they?
Funny you say that. We don't seem to have much of a military these days. We've been cut right back down to the bones of anything. I don't know whether we could even defend ourselves, but it's a good job we've got those UN troops to fall back on, isn't it, Alex?
Yeah. Well, we're just a small island, innit? So
Small island that's always been fighting.
Yeah.
we got into a position now where we don't know what we're meant to be fighting for. Are we meant to be fighting about council tax, TV license, mortgages? Are we meant to be fighting about benefits being given to people who are coming into this country illegally? They're not even coming in legally anymore. It doesn't matter. If you come into a country legally, you are going to that country because not only of their benefits, but you're going to transition, for want of a better word, into their way of life. Can you imagine going to Spain and saying, stop speaking Spanish, you need to speak English? That couldn't happen. But we can't do that here because it comes down to hate speech. So we've got a fundamental problem that is gestating in the court system and the judiciary, and the police are just following orders. And that's the budding for everything what you've just spoken about in Europe. I mean, he's known as Uncle Joe. Killed millions of people.
Yep, 60 million, I believe it. 60+ million, I believe it was.
But we don't talk about Uncle Adolf, but we still talk about Uncle Joe. So we've got a problem with lies and liars. That's what we've got a massive problem with. Whatever's gone on in our history, if you're uninterested to go and research it yourself and look through the crap as well as what we take as so-called fact, and try and weigh this up. We've got to learn to discern. The problem we've got is, especially now with many people not being themselves, we talk about the jabs. There's massive amounts of articles and evidence saying that, family members, they've had jabs and their personalities have changed. They've become miserable and they've become down, and then they get ill, and it's almost like when you feel down, you're more susceptible to being ill, and you've already got a weakened immune system as well. But we can't talk about it because people say, no, it's not that, it's not. people are embarrassed. I personally know people are embarrassed that they went and had those jabs. They thought they were doing the right thing, but now they know they didn't, and they won't have any more. But we're going to get tested again very soon. We're coming up for it very soon.
Yeah.
Oh, Alex has appeared to have left us for some reason.
Probably got disconnected, unfortunately. But there is one more story that I did want to cover. But before I did that, I just want to tell everyone my YouTube account was unfortunately deleted again. So
your new YouTube channel is listed in the description box already.
Yeah. All right, thank you. But just so everyone knows that I just made a new YouTube account a couple days ago. I posted in the chat as well. Please like and subscribe. I've been doing some audiobooks. Particularly, I just finished this one right here. It is if you could show it on the screen, that would be nice. But hold on, give me a second.
I'm going to say, I'll add it when you put it up.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Here, right here. Let me present it. Share screen. Amazon. I just got through reading this book right here, which just came out about a week ago or so, maybe a little more than a week. Dig 'em Up: 40 Famous Natural Deaths or Assassinations by Poison, which is going over, I believe, is 40, maybe 50 people. In the last, mainly American, but a few international figures as well, in the last couple hundred years, who died under very mysterious circumstances, like say they had a stroke, or they had a heart attack, or they or a quote unquote overdose or whatever. These people who just so happened to die at the right time that was very suspicious. Like, say, for example, let me give an example. Stephen Douglas, who is the Democratic nominee, who was Abraham Lincoln's Democratic opponent in the 1860 election. He was the head of the Democratic Party and the soul of it. And he was completely pro-union, just like Lincoln was. And even though that they were rivals, Stephen Douglas joined forces with him in order to help preserve the Union. Just a few months later, he suddenly drops dead of so-called bad water. The bad water excuse they use for several of these kinds of people. So that's just an example. These people who just so happen to be very important, but they die at very opportune times under very suspicious circumstances that could be classified as arsenic poisoning, which goes back hundreds of thousands of years as the most preferred method to assassinate someone rather than using a lone gunman, because you have plausible deniability. You can always say, oh, it was just natural. They just died of natural causes, etc., etc. So I recommend listening to the audiobook that I did. The first one's 40 minutes long. The other one's 2.5 hours. And I felt that it presented a lot of really good information. Now, I will say the last story that I want to talk about is this one right here. 60 Minutes chief resigns in emotional meeting. The company is done with me. The news program has faced mounting pressure from both President Trump and his corporate ownership at Paramount, the parent company of CBS News. Winning. The CBS investigative propaganda show 60 Minutes first debuted in 1968. And I assume you know what 60 Minutes is, right?
Say again.
You know what 60 Minutes is, correct?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, yeah. The atrocious act went on to become the most watched and highly esteemed news show in American history. Week after week, millions of passive normies participated in this bizarre post-NFL football game Sunday evening ritual, which began with the hypnotic ticking sound of a large stopwatch. Tick, 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 followed by the authoritative voice of Mr. Newsman summoning the bewildered masses to worship. An astute observer watching people gather around the boob tube when 60 Minutes came on couldn't help but notice how transfixed they became the precise moment that the hypnotist's watch began ticking. Even as a child, totally ignorant of political questions, I intuitively sensed that something was fundamentally creepy about this mesmerizing weekly spectacle, which so instantly intrigued my otherwise conservative parents and older siblings. This is not me writing this, by the way, just to clarify. Over the years, some of the most devious and despicable, though oh so respected, names in fake news have served as correspondents for the show. Award winners such as Mike Wallace, Harry Reasoner, Dan Rather, Morley Safer, Diane Sawyer, Ed Bradley, Steve Croft, Leslie Stahl, Scott Pelley, Bill Whittaker, and Anderson Cooper, aka Anderson Cooper, have all contributed to this hyped-up disinformation production, which artfully blended some interesting and neutral pieces in with the mind-numbing, soul-crushing poison pills. Invariably, the weekly show included one selectively edited gotcha piece on this or that domestic or foreign bad guy of the day. And if a targeted villain, let's call him Mr. X, refused to submit himself to this unwinnable gotcha game, 60 Minutes would run a hit piece on him anyway. With the correspondent reporting, we asked Mr. X to sit down for an interview, but he declined. This underhanded tactic made it seem as though Mr. X had something to hide. It was such a slick and dirty game which normies were defenseless against. And this is some telltale images of that station. In this day and age of Commander Trump, it is not surprising to see that this dreadful institution is also being cut down to size. The Q operation is leaving no stone unturned. The happy recap from the article. Quote, CBS News entered a new period of turmoil on Tuesday after the executive producer of 60 Minutes, Bill Owens, said he would resign from the long-running Sunday news program. In an extraordinary declaration, Mr. Owens, only the third person to run the program in its 57-year history, told his staff in a memo that over the past months it has become clear that I would not be allowed to run the show as I have always run it, to make independent decisions based on what was right for 60 Minutes. So having defended the show and what we stand for from every angle over time with everything I could, I am stepping aside so the show can move forward, he wrote in the memo, which was obtained by the New York Times, New York Times, rather, end quote. 60 Minutes has faced mounting pressure in recent months from both President Trump, who sued CBS for $10 billion and has accused the program of unlawful and illegal behavior and its own corporate ownership at Paramount, the parent company of CBS News. End quote. In accordance with Q Post 158, excerpt copied below, Trump is using lawfare as one of the several weapons calculated to break fake news. The hypnotic spell of 60 Minutes has been shattered. Tick, 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 tick. Trust the plan. Q Post 158, November 20th, 2017. What laws were put in place to protect the MSM from lawsuits? Who specifically passed this law? What is immunity? What prevents a news organization from simply making up sources and stories? What previous Supreme Court ruling provided protection to reporters from having to reveal their confidential sources? How many people are unaware of the truth due to the stranglehold? So this Q post is basically pointing out, as many of them do, about the MSM and about the weapons that they've used, and how one of the weapons that the good guys use in order to bring them down is lawsuits, rather than just going in guns blazing. Because as soon as you get that dirt on them, that's all you really need to know. And what is CBS? CBS, just like NBC, was one of the very first big Jewish-run mainstream media outlets formed back in the 1920s. And I'll read a little bit from here. The all-seeing eye, the all-seeing Illuminati eye, is the logo of CBS. CBS founder-in-chief William Paloff was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. During World War II, Paley served as director of radio operations of the Psychological Warfare Branch in the Office of War Information in London, where he held the rank of colonel. His 60-year reign at CBS oversaw the rise of 60 Minutes, Walter Cronkite, and many TV shows with embedded leftist spin. For example, All in the Family, The Jeffersons, MASH, etc. And David Sarnoff of NBC, another Jewish immigrant who also served in World War II as who was also serving as another head of the Psychological Warfare Branch. So these two figures, and ABC would soon follow as under the same circumstances. These were the same people who started the big radio news stations back in the 1920s, because back then it was just NBC and CBS. Then it goes into television, of course, after World War II. They oversaw that. And a question you can ask any normie is, if these two, David Sarnoff and William Paley, served as heads of Psychological Warfare Branches in World War II used against both the Allies and the Germans. Of course, the Germans would never fall for it because they were too red-pilled. But regardless, if they did this back then, what makes you think they wouldn't? Just think. What makes you think they wouldn't be doing the same thing now, or rather, when they came back to the U.S.?
Well, that's the point. People don't think about these things. They wait until the mainstream media tells them what's going on, and the mainstream media aren't going to tell them things like that. Anyway, mate, we're coming up to 10 o'clock now, so do you want to wrap this up?
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say, ironically enough, recently I've come to the realization that one of the best things to watch if you want a simplified version of what the narrative of what's going on is, and a decent and a pretty good actual interpretation of it, is actually Fox News. Fox News has been spreading a lot of very good information recently, and it's really been interesting to watch. You can even tell that people are liking it. Their ratings have started going back up. They're still not as good as their prime, but still. Meanwhile, CNN, MSNBC, and all of them are still tanking under 80% loss of viewership, and soon they'll even be heading into the single digits. It's amazing. Meanwhile, the people that still do watch these left-winging networks, they're having certain things pumped into them even through them, because they're also controlled. The left is being controlled. I'll give an example. CNN, or as I like to call it now, QNN, has been showing some very interesting things, like polling data, for example, showing just how much the Democrats have been losing favor within the American public, and showing just how much people despise a lot of the things that Trump is that Trump has now taken care of. And the thing is that may not seem like much by itself, but when you have the mainstream media propping up these polls, what it does is it actually pushes more and more people to fall into that same line of thinking, because they'll think of whatever the mainstream media is telling them. So if CNN is showing this poll saying, "Oh, people don't like Democrats," then they'll start to dislike them too, or at least start to like them less. That makes sense. Follow the trend. They follow where the trend is telling them. So
I can see what you mean, mate.
It's a very sophisticated operation, and I'll say one more thing, and that's that this is a worldwide operation, and that you can even see that over there. Farage, say it one more time. What is Keir Starmer is the prime minister? Nigel Farage is the other one. Okay, I just remembered. Just wait until Farage comes in, because things are going to be becoming very, very interesting. Even if they don't, even if there is, of course, some understandable doubt, things are still going to be becoming very interesting. So, just we'll see what happens there. Hopefully, it doesn't turn into another Canada situation, because that's not going very well either, unfortunately. But but anyway, thanks everyone for listening to me. Please subscribe to my channel, and give me a like and follow and all that stuff. And thank you again, Webby, for allowing me to come on.
No worries, mate. Thanks for your report and your insights, and keep doing it, mate. We need a different bit of information coming in. I don't know what's happened to Alex. He's dropped off. But it's better to get all these points of view and get what's coming through the chat room as well, because we've got to have these conversations. It's that simple. We can't just say, "Oh, it's that" anymore, because when it's been that, I've found out it's not that. So I've got to ask questions about everything. And text, especially when you're in the chat room, text isn't always the greatest medium.
Yeah, it's really not.
To exchange information. That's why we always say that if you've got these opinions in the chat room, come on the show, tell us your opinions, and then we can debate them. Because just a comment and a response doesn't always pan out. So obviously you've got your own work set for next week, is to get some more stuff together, Taylor. So I'll see you next week, my friend.
All right. Thanks again, and take care, everybody.
You too, mate. God bless.
God bless.
Well, like I said, I don't know what happened to Alex. He was in and out, and then he's just flopped out somewhere. I don't know what the crack is. But I'd like to thank everybody in the chat room for being on tonight. I know it's a bank holiday, so we always knew that there might not be many on tonight, like they weren't the last bank holiday. But you know, the messages that we get all the time, it's just about conversation. Honestly, me and Alex don't really care anymore whether you agree or disagree. It's about the in-between, agreeing and disagreeing. Well, let's talk. Why are you disagreeing? Why are you agreeing? That's all we want. We just want to get this conversation going before it's too late, possibly. See you next week, guys. God willing. Night, God bless.